Breaking. What if I told you that one of hip-hop's most loyal alliances was actually a ticking time bomb waiting to explode? That the man Camron once called a brother was secretly plotting behind his back, scheming in the shadows while everyone smiled for the cameras. Yeah, you heard that right. Jim Jones, the guy who rose up under Cam's wing, who got taught how to rap by Cam and Mazes, allegedly cooking up plans straight out of a crime thriller. And here's the kicker. Cam's own mother, Frederica Giles, saw it coming years before it even happened. She looked him dead in the eye and said, "That man is going to try to take you out." Imagine knowing the storm is coming and watching it brew while the world calls it just another beef. But this is way beyond industry drama. This is betrayal, envy, and revenge wrapped in the glitz and grime of the hip-hop world. So, what really happened behind closed doors? Who was playing the long game, and who was too blind to see it? Buckle up, because today we're exposing the truth that the mainstream media won't touch, and, trust me, it's uglier than you think. Are you ready to see the side of Jim Jones they didn't teach you about in rap class? It all starts with trust, or at least the illusion of it. Camron and Jim Jones were once inseparable, once brothers in the limelight. The kind of duo that commanded attention without even trying. A combination of charisma, street sense, and undeniable talent. That made the Dipset era feel untouchable. Fans cheered, cameras flashed, the industry buzzed, and the world watched them build an empire of music, influence, and swagger. But behind the glamorous videos and public smiles, there were fissures forming, subtle at first, almost invisible, cracks that most people would never notice until it was too late. These cracks widened over time, transforming into a slow-burning tension fueled by envy, ambition, and a hunger for recognition that could not be satisfied. Jim Jones did not just appear as the figure we know today. He was cultivated, guided, and taught by the very people he now allegedly envies. Cam and Maze took a young, ambitious man, showed him the ropes, handed him the blueprint for success, taught him the intricacies of flow, the power of bars, the strategy behind moves in the music business, and the politics of the streets, giving him a foundation that most artists spend years struggling to understand on their own. And yet, somewhere along the way, the student stopped wanting to follow the lessons and began to desire the throne, a position that was never meant to be his. He wanted not just recognition, but dominion, the crown itself. And more than that, he wanted the world to believe that he had earned it independently, without the help that he had clearly received. The tension had always been there, simmering, under the surface, but it took someone with eyes, like Cam's mother, Frederica Giles, to articulate it years in advance. Frederica was more than a parent. She was a guardian of insight, a witness to her son's life, a part of his sound and spirit, fully aware of the players in his world, fully aware of the motives that drove them, and she was not afraid to voice what most ignored. Long before anyone suspected that loyalties would fracture, she looked her son in the eye and said that Jim Jones was planning to take him out. It was not speculation, it was not drama, it was a warning from someone who understood the subtle shifts, the quiet envy, the ambition masked as loyalty. And for years, people shrugged it off, called it paranoia, or dismissed it as the overprotectiveness of a mother who loved her son too much. But the truth is that everything she foresaw is starting to line up in ways that are almost impossible to ignore. Every misstep, every passive-aggressive comment, every awkward interview that once seemed trivial now reads like a page from a carefully orchestrated playbook of envy and competition. Looking back, the signs were always there, woven into the narrative of the music, the interactions, the alliances, and the splits. And then there was the infamous 2005 incident in Washington, D.C. during Howard University homecoming. A moment that still sends chills through anyone who understands the stakes. Cam was cruising in a Lamborghini when suddenly two masked men appeared at a red light and opened fire, bullets striking him in both arms, turning a night of celebration into a fight for survival. The mainstream media labeled it as a failed carjacking, a random act of violence on the streets, but anyone paying attention to the undercurrents knew better. The hood never bought the story. It felt off, too calculated, too pointed, a message rather than an accident. And when you connect the dots with Frederica's warning, it suddenly reads like a precursor to a more insidious plot. Surviving that attack was not just luck. It was escape, a narrow window that preserved Cam's life and allowed him to continue building his legacy while others plotted in shadows. At the same time, the incident revealed something deeper about the people around him, those who smiled publicly, but harbored envy privately. And it laid bare a culture where gratitude was optional and ambition often came at the cost of loyalty. Jim's behavior over the years fits this pattern perfectly, moving from admiration and public allegiance to subtle disses, calculated missteps, and eventually public declarations that there was no brotherhood, no loyalty, no family, no tie that could not be broken. And when he openly admitted that there was no brotherhood with Cam, the world finally saw what insiders had known for years. The veneer of camaraderie was gone. Stripped away by ambition, jealousy, and resentment, people began piecing together the long history, noticing the repeated alignment with outside figures like 50 Cent during the Dipset vs. G-Unit tensions. The moments when Jim seemed more interested in stepping into the spotlight than maintaining the bonds that had raised him. Observers and commentators, both real and imagined, started tracing the pattern, connecting Jim's pursuit of attention and relevance to the very mentorship he had received, the blueprint that Cam and Maze had given him, and realizing that what had been portrayed as rivalry and industry beef was actually something more personal, more calculated, and far more dangerous than anyone wanted to admit. And it is in that realization that the full suspense emerges, because it is no longer just about music, fame, or social media clout. It is about the long game, the power plays, and the quiet envy that can escalate to very real threats. Every interview, every social media post, every vague quote takes on new weight, as people start to understand that Jim Jones' trajectory has been shaped by the very people he now undermines, that his ambitions have long outpaced his gratitude, and that the story of loyalty and brotherhood was always more fiction than fact. In analyzing his actions, patterns emerge: the trips to align with outsiders during public conflicts, the passive-aggressive responses to Cam's success, the exaggerated stunts for attention, the insistence on showing relevance even as his foundation eroded. And yet, while Jim flails to maintain a spotlight, Cam continues to build quietly, strategically, maintaining influence, legacy, and respect that cannot be bought or staged. The suspense deepens as the audience begins to recognize that what they once interpreted as entertainment, industry drama, or playful banter was actually a series of warning signs, a chronology of envy and ambition that had been carefully disguised as rivalry, only now coming into focus. The pieces fit together in a way that is almost cinematic, a real-life thriller unfolding over decades. And it is impossible to ignore the eerie accuracy of Frederica Giles' warning, the trajectory of Jim's behavior, and the survival and resilience of Camron, who navigated threats that were both obvious and invisible. Every small interaction, every comment, every decision is now viewed through the lens of anticipation and suspicion, building tension that keeps fans and observers on edge, waiting to see the next move, trying to decode the signals of betrayal and ambition, and realizing that in this game of loyalty, mentorship, and legacy, the rules are written by history but manipulated by those who refuse to respect it. The full magnitude of this scandal is only now coming to light, revealing a complex tapestry of influence, manipulation, survival, and envy. A story that spans decades, shaped by mentorship turned into rivalry, trust turned into suspicion, and guidance turned into a blueprint for betrayal. The DC shooting from years ago started taking on new meaning, reframed not as a random act of violence but as a harbinger of the lengths some people would go to for attention and control. A warning sign, camouflaged by circumstance, a message that said if you step out of line, there will be consequences. And Frederica's warning became eerily prescient in retrospect, because when you consider the calculated way Jim aligned with 50 Cent during the Dipset vs. G-Unit tensions, it paints a picture of someone waiting for opportunity, someone watching, learning, and plotting. A player in a larger game where loyalty is optional and betrayal is a tactic. Fans who had once cheered for Jim began sharing their own theories, claiming that the boxing stunts, the public feuds, and the viral antics were all part of an ongoing attempt to grab attention, to validate himself in a world that had already crowned Cam the real architect of influence, the person who built paths, nurtured talent, and survived threats that would have sidelined lesser figures. While Jim was left trying to spin his way back into relevance, trying to manufacture drama where none naturally existed, and even the most loyal supporters started questioning the authenticity of his claims, the legitimacy of his grudges, and the value of his contributions. Because it became increasingly obvious that while Cam was building empires quietly, diversifying ventures, and strengthening a legacy, Jim was chasing shadows, fighting ghosts, and performing for an audience that had already moved on. A man trapped by his own ego and his inability to acknowledge the help and mentorship that got him where he was. Social media amplified every moment, every comment, every subtle diss, turning minor slights into viral talking points, while analysts, bloggers, and fans created timelines, piecing together events from the past 2 decades, looking at album releases, interviews, appearances, and conflicts, and finding a consistent theme of envy masked as ambition, jealousy disguised as independence, and self-serving moves disguised as rivalry. The result was a collective reckoning, a realization that the person who was once called a brother had become a figure defined by insecurity and desperation. A man willing to undermine relationships, rewrite history, and jeopardize trust in order to carve out attention and relevance. And every observer began to weigh the evidence: the public disses, the alignment with rivals, the exaggerated stunts, the failed attempts at proving himself, the constant need for validation. Industry veterans, insiders, and even casual fans started pointing out patterns that were impossible to ignore, recognizing that Jim's behavior was not isolated, but part of a long trajectory that showed a clear disregard for loyalty, respect, and mentorship. Meanwhile, Cam remained steady, resilient, and untouchable in ways that contrasted sharply with Jim's antics, demonstrating that true power and influence are built through skill, patience, and integrity, not theatrics and desperation. The suspense only heightened as each public appearance, freestyle, or viral moment by Jim was dissected, mocked, or criticized, and as the narrative gained traction, the idea that Jim Jones' ambition had morphed into envy-driven obsession became harder to dismiss, while Cam's achievements continued to accumulate, further highlighting the disparity between genuine legacy and performative relevance, and reinforcing the notion that sometimes the biggest threats come not from rivals outside, but from those once considered family, those who knew the blueprint, those who were given access and guidance, yet chose to betray it, and the audience could not help but follow every twist, every revelation, every implied threat, and every misstep, knowing that what they were witnessing was not just history repeating itself, but a live case study in ambition, betrayal, and the long shadow of mentorship gone awry. The combination of public commentary, leaked narratives, and pattern recognition created an atmosphere of tension and suspense. A sense that the feud was more than entertainment, that it was a cautionary tale about loyalty, envy, and survival. In a world where reputation and influence are fragile, and as viewers and fans pieced the story together, the full magnitude of what had been unfolding for years became impossible to ignore, creating a narrative that was as thrilling as it was unsettling, and as dramatic as it was real, because in the end, it was a story not just about music, fame, or clout, but about ambition, betrayal, and the consequences of ignoring warnings from those who see the storm before it arrives. Every old story, every interview, every feud, every alignment with outsiders like 50 Cent during the Dipset vs. G-Unit era, every cryptic Instagram post, and every staged event became part of a larger narrative that fans and commentators were piecing together, realizing that Jim had been consistently attempting to position himself as a leader, a central figure, a kingpin, while the truth was he had been a beneficiary of mentorship and guidance, someone who had been handed tools and a blueprint, and instead of gratitude, he displayed envy, resentment, and a hunger for attention that clouded judgment. And now the world was seeing the consequences unfold in real time, watching a man unravel in front of their eyes, acting as if the legacy he was trying to claim was naturally his, when in reality it had been built and protected by others who had survived threats, betrayal, and the complexities of the streets. The suspense and drama escalated as Jim continued posting videos, throwing weak disses, challenging Cam to boxing matches, and generally performing theatrics that only highlighted his insecurities, his inability to grow, and his fixation on relevance, while Cam's career moved on, unbothered, diversified, and thriving, showing that true power lies in substance and consistency, not in manufactured hype. And the fans noticed, the streets noticed, the industry noticed, and even casual observers began calling Jim out for behaving like a grown man trapped in a pattern of childish ambition, fighting ghosts, and trying to reclaim attention from a world that had already decided who mattered. Analysis of his moves revealed a timeline of envy-driven decisions, starting from his early years in Dipset when he was taught to rap, mentored, given guidance and support, through incidents like the DC shooting, the subtle disses, the alliances with rivals, the staged feuds, and now culminating in his attempts to reclaim relevance in ways that seemed increasingly futile, desperate, and almost tragic. A cautionary tale of ambition, unchecked by humility, gratitude, or public opinion turned sharply, as fans openly mocked his attempts to gain attention, pointing out that Cam's legacy was intact and thriving. That Jim's theatrics only served to emphasize the gap between genuine influence and manufactured drama, and social media exploded with commentary, dissecting each stunt, comparing it to the mentorship he had received, and highlighting the irony of a man trying to act like a king when the very throne he sought had been built by the ones he disrespected. Analysts and insiders began drawing comparisons to historical examples of betrayal, mentorship gone wrong, and the way envy can consume talent, noting that Jim's actions reflected a long-standing pattern of entitlement and insecurity, a repeated failure to acknowledge the role of others in his success, and an inability to adapt, evolve, or act with humility, which only intensified the suspense and drama surrounding the narrative. Because now the story was not just about music, fame, or rivalry, it was about loyalty, trust, and the consequences of disregarding warnings, ignoring mentorship, and letting envy dictate moves over decades. The tension built to almost cinematic levels as every public interaction, social media post, interview, or music video became a clue in the unfolding saga. A piece of evidence revealing a man attempting to manipulate perception while failing to recognize that the world was watching, analyzing, and ultimately seeing the truth. That Cam had always been the one in control, the architect, the master of legacy, while Jim's moves were increasingly desperate attempts to assert authority, attention, and relevance, a pattern that only made the audience more engaged, more invested, and more aware of the irony and drama playing out in real time. And the suspense kept building as everyone watched to see if Jim would continue down this path of manufactured conflict, public displays, and desperate stunts, while Cam, quietly, consistently, and effectively, strengthened his influence and cemented his legacy, proving that power and respect are not built on theatrics, but on skill, consistency, and authenticity. And in the end, the story revealed a cautionary tale, a real-life thriller in hip-hop form, of ambition turned envy, mentorship turned betrayal, and the consequences of trying to claim a legacy that was never truly yours, leaving viewers on edge, shocked, and questioning what would happen next in a saga that continues to captivate, provoke, and reveal the complex dynamics of loyalty, trust, and survival in the world of music, power, and influence. Now that you've seen the full story, the question is simple: who do you really trust in a world where loyalty is optional and betrayal hides behind a smile? How much of what we've witnessed was ambition, how much was envy, and how much was survival? Cam built, Jim destroyed, and we've all been watching the fallout unfold like a slow-motion thriller. But the story isn't over. The streets are still talking, social media is still buzzing, and every move, every post, every subtle diss could be a clue to what comes next. You don't want to blink because the next revelation could change everything you thought you knew about power, legacy, and loyalty. So don't just watch, dig deeper, question everything, and ask yourself, who really benefits when the mentorship is betrayed, when ambition eclipses gratitude, when envy becomes the driver of action? The truth is out there, and it's messy, shocking, and sometimes hard to accept. If you want to stay ahead, know the real story before the headlines twist it, and witness the drama unfold as it happens. Hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you never miss the next explosive revelation in this saga that's bigger than music, bigger than fame, and far more dangerous than anyone expected.